Hi, I'm Slow Page John Green, coming at you with another non-crash course United States history. Today we discovered together the short-lived presidency of Warren G. Harding and the regular presidencies of Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. Well, we'll explain that later.
Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Do 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 do.
These Republican presidents were pro-business and promoted laissez-faire capitalism. The prosperity of this time period was shown by the Roaring Twenties, which would soon crash and burn in the year of 1929, leading into the not-so-Great Depression. In short, the 20s would be like going to a party, having a good time, and then waking up the next day with a killer hangover. Warren G. Harding, an Ohio Republican, was the 29th president who was in office from 1921 to 1923. Although his presidency was filled with scandal, throughout his presidency, he embraced technology and was sensitive to minorities and women. To teach y'all more about these presidencies in U.S. history, we're going to use my favorite U.S. history book. Harding had been a newspaper publisher in Ohio before entering politics. He was handsome and well-liked among the Republican political cronies with whom he regularly played poker with. Before his nomination, Warren G. Harding declared, "America's present need is not heroics but healing, not nostrums but normalcy, not revolution but restoration, not agitation but adjustments, not surgery but serenity, not the dramatic but the dispassionate, not experiment but equipoise." I don't know. You get the gist of it. When the Republican National Convention of 1920 deadlocked, the party bosses decided in a smoke-filled room to deliver the nomination to Harding as a compromise choice. When Harding was elected president, he picked many able men to fill his cabinet. He appointed the former presidential candidate and Supreme Court Justice Charles Evan Hughes to be Secretary of State, the greatly admired former mining engineer and Food Administration leader Herbert Hoover to be the Secretary of Commerce, and the Pittsburgh industrialist and millionaire Andrew Mellon to be Secretary of the Treasury. When the Chief Justice's seat on the Supreme Court became vacant, Harding filled it by appointing former President William Howard Taft. Last but not least, Warren G. Harding appointed Calvin Coolidge as his vice president. In his presidency, Warren G. Harding had his own domestic policies. For instance, he approved a reduction in the income tax, 2, an increase in tariff rates under the Forney-McCumber Tariff Act of 1922, and 3, establishment of the Bureau of the Budget with procedures for all government expenditures to be placed in a single budget for Congress to review and vote on. The Forney-McCumber Tariff of 1922 was a law that raised American tariffs on many imported goods to protect factories and farms. The U.S. Congress displayed a pro-business attitude in passing the tariff and in promoting foreign trade by providing huge loans to Europe. That, in turn, bought more U.S. goods. Now it's time to throw some shade and spill the tea about Harding's presidency. Harding did surprise many people, particularly his conservative allies, by pardoning and releasing from federal prison socialist leader Eugene Debs. Curiously, Harding's post-war presidency was marked by scandals and corruption similar to those that had occurred under an earlier post-war president, Ulysses S. Grant. Having appointed some excellent officials, Harding also selected a number of incompetent and dishonest men to fulfill important positions, including Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall and Attorney General Harry M. Daugherty. In 1924, Congress discovered that Fall had accepted bribes from granting oil leases near Teapot Dome. Daugherty also took bribes for agreeing not to prosecute certain criminal suspects. A lot of fear was thrown at Harding's presidency after this all happened, and shortly after, Harding was traveling to the West Coast and died of a heart attack. In 1923, Calvin Coolidge succeeds President Hardin after his tragic death. Calvin Coolidge had many domestic policies during his presidency. Coolidge believed in limited government and allowed business to conduct its affairs. He also opposed prohibition and supported women's suffrage and direct elections of senators, establishing himself as a progressive Republican. Another domestic policy of Calvin Coolidge was the Immigration Act of 1924, which imposed limits on immigration from parts of Eastern and Southern Europe. Coolidge supported laissez-faire ideology of free market capitalism. His administration lowered income taxes, cut spending, limited federal regulation of economy. As a result, the federal debt and budget deficit shrank, and the economy boomed, which is the roaring 20s. Moving on to Calvin Coolidge's foreign policies during his presidency. The Coolidge administration was hesitant to cultivate alliances with foreign powers. It did not oppose League of Nations, but at the same time, it doubted to help U.S. interests. Another major foreign policy initiative was the Kellogg-Briand Pact. It was an agreement between the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, France, Italy, and Germany to renounce war as an instrument of national policy, one of the enduring principles of international law in the post-World War I period. After less than a year in office after President Hardin died, Coolidge was the overwhelming choice of the Republican Party as their presidential nominee in 1924. The Democrats nominated a conservative lawyer from West Virginia, John W. Davis, and tried to make an issue of the Teapot Dome scandal. Unhappy with conservative dominance of both parties, liberals formed a new progressive party led by its presidential candidate, Robert La Follette of Wisconsin. Coolidge won the election easily. Time for a mystery document. Today's is a short one. It says, the chief business of the American people is business. That should be Jay-Z.
No, that's Coolidge.
Guess I gotta do this. Ah!
I transformed Coolidge's quote and actually said, I'm not a businessman, I'm a business man.
Now let's go into my notes to talk about our final president, President Hoover. Coolidge declined to run for the presidency a second time. The Republicans therefore turned to an able leader with a spotless reputation, self-made millionaire, and Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover. Republicans boasted of Coolidge's prosperity, which Hoover promised to extend. He even suggested, ironically as it proved, that poverty would soon be ended altogether. However, Hoover won in a landslide and even took a large number of the electoral votes in the South. Let's start with Herbert Hoover's foreign policies. Herbert Hoover practiced isolationism. Hoover agreed with the prevailing opinion of the American people that the U.S. should not enter into firm commitments to preserve the security of other nations. Also, during his presidency, he came up with something called the Stimson Doctrine. The Stimson Doctrine was the United States' response to Japan's violation of the open door policy. In this declaration by Secretary of State Henry Stimson, the U.S. would honor its treaty obligations under the Nine-Powered Treaty by refusing to recognize the legitimacy of any regime that was established by force. In Latin America, Hoover actively pursued friendly relations with the countries there. Hoover ended the interventionist policies of Taft and Wilson by arranging for U.S. troops to leave Nicaragua by 1933 and negotiating a treaty with Haiti to remove all U.S. troops by 1934. Through trade and the Dawes Plan for the repayment of war debts, European prosperity was closely tied to that of the U.S. Another part of his foreign policy was the Hawley-Smoot Tariff of 1930. This tariff set tax increases ranging from 31 to 49% on foreign imports, which was the highest in history. In retaliation, European countries enacted higher tariffs on their own against U.S. goods, which reduced trade for all nations, meaning both national and international economies sank further into depression. Economic conditions in the U.S. and European nations became so bad that the Dawes plan for collecting war debts could no longer continue. So Hoover proposed a moratorium, which is a suspension, on the payment of international debt. The international economy suffered from massive loan defaults, and banks scrambled to meet the demands of the many depositors who were withdrawing their money at the time. And now for Herbert Hoover's domestic policies. He supported and signed into law programs that offered assistance to indebted farmers and struggling businesses. He also created Federal Farm Board. The Farm Board, created in 1929, received enlarged powers to meet the economic crisis. The board was authorized to help farmers stabilize prices by temporarily holding surplus grain and cottage in storage. However, the program was too modest to handle the overproduction of farm goods. He later on passed the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or the RFC, federally funded and government-owned corporation created by Congress in 1932 as a measure for propping up faltering railroads, banks, life insurance companies, and other financial institutions. Hoover reasoned that emergency loans from the RFC would help stabilize these key businesses. The benefits would then trickle down, to smaller businesses and ultimately bring recovery. Democrats believe this measure would only help the rich. Food Administration encouraged conservation at home, which helped the people. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you guys learned exactly what you need.